All right, welcome everybody. Yep. To participate in the giveaway, please follow me and Frontrunners DC on Twitter and tweet something about the conference. And it's also a great doorstop. And to adjust the height of your monitor, it helps. I use it for that purpose. All right. So, yep, unfortunately, 289 days to go till Christmas. Sorry to disappoint. And welcome to my talk, Intro to Qwik. It's the answer to web's scalability issues. And thank you, Chris, for the plug in your talk. I'm a principal fellow for modern software delivery at Excella, where we're a local company here in Arlington. And yep, you can check me out on Twitter at Uluca. I'm on Mastodon as well. All right. So let's get into it. Has anyone ever had performance issues with your web app? It's only a few people. So everyone is very lightly using their web apps. All right. So it's you know, some of the you notice that your web apps having problems if your first contentful paint is slow, and actually Amazon has some great metrics about this. Like every 100 millisecond latency, they lose $1 million or something like that. Time to interactive. So you could show some content, but if you know, your users aren't able to interact with the website yet, you know, it's going to feel slow. There's also just general latency. You know, you click on UI elements. You know, this never happens, right? You click on it, you're like, why is my phone not working? I just got this phone. Nope, it's the website being slow. And then frame drops. You know, you're scrolling and you know, you're not getting that 60 frames per second. You know, I know it's not Counter-Strike Go or something like that, but you know, we still prefer a smooth frame rate. So, any other indicators that anyone has experienced in terms of slowness? Video stops. Okay. I'm not sure what a video stop is. I'm sorry. It'll be a mystery. Any other? All right. Thank you for the addition. So the browser is a complicated runtime, and the frameworks we use for our web apps obfuscate this runtime in exchange for rich features and easier to maintain code. However, the frameworks of 2023 have become really complicated in their own right. So they're not easy to understand or debug really. In the Angular community, Michael Hladky is really into you know, squeezing as much performance out of Angular. So if you ever use the profiling tool in DevTools in your browser, you'll be able to generate these flame graphs, and this is a snapshot of the Angular bootstrap phase, and it is pretty complicated to a point where, you know, you have to kind of you know, identify certain areas and you know, have a deep knowledge of how things work to be able to debug issues. So what's slowing us down here? You know, downloading JavaScript. So your application code, the framework, you know, third-party libraries, that is slowing us down. Executing the JavaScript. So you have to load the framework. You know, the browser has to just-in-time transpile your or just-in-time execute your JavaScript code, and then, you know, behind the scenes, all the scaffolding has to happen to, you know, set up your component trees and you know, the state of your application and hydrate your application. It has to compute the state, connect all the listeners to the DOM, and then finally render everything out. And then once everything loads out, then change detection starts happening, because we bind our values to the HTML, and the framework, you know, makes this really nice and neat for us. And, you know, whenever an event triggers, value changes, you know, things needs to be re-rendered. So flame graphs can get really complicated. So we got to fight fire with fire. We need to you know, wipe the slate clean and get a good handle on our application performance. So this is enter left stage Qwik. So this framework has a very strong pedigree. It's been created by Miško Hevry. He is the original creator of the Angular framework. Adam Bradley, he's been around forever with like jQuery Mobile, Ionic, and then Stencil.js. So he's been really active in the open source space, and also Manu Corporate. And it's supported by Builder.io. So with Qwik, you get 5 to 10 times faster websites, full page loads under 1 second at scale, and it's easy to adopt. So the goal of the framework is to make you be able to just enable speed with just one command, one click from the developer's part. So we're going to talk about the need for Qwik, resumability, Qwik components, reactivity, and tips for starting with Qwik. So why do we need Qwik? What's the fastest way to render a web page? I was thinking about some possible solutions. We can reduce use of third-party code, so just push those unnecessary libraries out. We can leverage ahead-of-time complication or compilation, tree shaking, code splitting to help make things into smaller chunks. We can lazy load our modules, so we don't have to download everything at the very beginning. We can leverage server-side rendering to help that initial loading speed, but we start running out of options here. Then you got to go in there and find the hotspots in your application and start optimizing the slow components by hand. You can remove features from your app because PMs are notorious for like, what if we had this and that, and then let's make it more animated, all that CSS. So you can remove features, or you can just ditch JavaScript and deliver pure HTML. That'll be plenty fast. With the problem with JavaScript has always been the same. There are issues and shortcomings, and the reaction to it has also. We're now in like the third iteration of the JavaScript matrix, where this is repeating itself over and over again, where just more concepts and more libraries are thrown at the problem, we just keep digging ourselves into a deeper and deeper hole. So this talk is also partly about for a challenge for everyone to question the reality in which they're in and understand the problem space. So we don't find ourselves just constantly digging for new solutions. All right, so and my advice to that is becoming a minimalist. I've been giving talks for about 10 years now, and that's been the core message of pretty much every talk I had. So this is a great example of a monk, climbing a really steep hill, and that's the developer on the other side. So if you master your surroundings and your elements, you can become that monk. You don't need all the fancy gear. You can become a minimalist and be successful. So Qwik itself is a minimalist. It's a tiny 1 kilobyte framework, so none of that 1 megabyte stuff. So Qwik does this by aggressively delaying downloading and execution of JavaScript. And most importantly, it doesn't need to hydrate anything to start the application. So, I want us to just be aware of the sandbags of complexity that's in our way, preventing us from success and making us feel like that, and use simpler tools that allow us to succeed. And Qwik is one of those. And we want great developer experience at work. So and that takes a lot of hard work to make it happen. So Qwik is simple. There's no clever algorithm doing some magic. It allows you to create reusable and resumable components, and we're going to dig into that in a second. And it has a familiar syntax to React. So you're not learning something completely out of left field. So the core element of Qwik is the component. And here is an example, a hello world component. So we wrap a React-like component in this function here. And then here's an example with a click event handler. And then another more complicated example using state, which uses that useSignal function over there. So who here has a swimming pool full of money? All right, a couple of people on the front here. So we're going to hang out after. Server-side rendering is really expensive with current frameworks. It is difficult to implement, and it is also expensive to host. And engineers are also expensive. So when you send dozens of engineers, trying to optimize your existing application, that is, costing a lot of money. And then when you need to go and bring experts to fix your problems, that is even more expensive. So just this idea of trying to sometimes fix what you already have can be a very expensive endeavor. So you need to kind of take a step back and consider what alternatives are, so we're not dealing with that sunk cost fallacy. All right, so Qwik makes server-side rendering easy. It is resumable from a server-side rendered state, and we're going to understand about that a bit better. The key is each component can be serialized to a state, so it's which makes it resumable, and it's also progressive in terms of because it's optimizer allows for fine-grained lazy loading. We're not just talking about even component level, we're talking about at function level. So what is this resumability? First, let's understand a little bit more about hydration. So all modern frameworks need hydration. We need to get the HTML, we need to download all the JavaScript related to that. We need to parse and execute the JavaScript, and then we need to bind our listeners. And then we're ready to go. Whereas with Qwik, all you got to do is get the HTML, and you're good to go. You can skip all those steps over there. So this is an example of the Angular architecture with its router, and you can configure lazy loading. And so initially, you have to do a whole bunch of work to hydrate the basics of your application. But if you know that some paths can be loaded later, you can lazily load that stuff. And React is similar. You can do a similar thing where you're chunking your components and lazily load them. So what does hydration include? It includes your framework state. It's internals. There's a lot of bookkeeping that's going around in the background with Angular, React, Vue. There's your component trees and how they're all related, because we got to calculate all the things for dependency injection and circular dependencies and everything. And then the listeners. These are all your event bindings, all your mouse events, scroll events, the things that make your application kind of pleasant to use. And then there's your application state. There's your parent component dependencies. So if you want to display a child component, usually you have to understand what the parent component does and work all that out in the background, or even have to render portions of it to get things going. And then there's finally the user data that you need to get, and that can be a lot of data as well, depending on how you configure things. Just think drop down datas and all these shared services we create to preload a whole bunch of data. So hydration is expensive. It's pure overhead and a fundamental architectural dependency. So these dependencies are baked into these frameworks. You can't just rip them out of them. So there is a fundamental issue with these frameworks. So who's good at here? Just fortune telling or seeing the future. Because that's what to optimize your web apps with lazy loading, etc. That's how you need to be. You need to predict everything that can happen in the future, so you can have the perfect architecture with the best lazy loading that's just great for a use case to succeed. So with Qwik, we don't need to rely on such sorcery. So our goals are, how can we seamlessly continue from a server-side rendered output and enable async lazy loading, and then also get the complexity of our application from whatever it is down to all of one, so that our solution will scale no matter how many components we throw at it or how many users are using it. So we need to efficiently deal with listeners, and we need to be able to independently restore components. So we need to be able to express listeners in a way that the browser doesn't need to eagerly load and process all listeners and event handlers to get an understanding of how to deal with our app. So this is an example of a QRL, a quick URL. Here we see a chunk.js and then the hashtag handler symbol. So that tells the framework, don't do anything with this, but know that when the click happens, you're gonna request a particular sliver of code to execute. So that's how it's able to defer processing all listeners and their dependencies. So how would we go about serializing a component? It's a fairly complicated thing to do. Can we just JSON.stringify and throw our component in there? Unfortunately, this wouldn't work. JSON.stringify has lots of limitations. Otherwise, you'll just get an object space object as your output. So Qwik can serialize components and also static and reactive state of your components. So what are the things that are serializable by Qwik? Circular references, DOM references, promises, function closures, dates, URL objects, map and set instances, so a lot of your state. There are a few limitations. Class instances or prototypes can't be serialized, and also reactive streams can't be serialized as well. So we need to make some changes in how we code our applications. All right, so Qwik by default enforces scalable patterns, and you don't need Crystal Ball to optimize your application. So how does a Qwik component work? So we start with the component, and then we import our use store or use signal fundamental. So every component has to be wrapped by the component $. So Qwik can process your component as a unit, and then use signal it sets up a reactive communication stream between your components, and then finally we just return our component design here. And we have our reactive state management there with use signal or use store. So with Qwik, components can use components. So we do have a component tree behind the scenes, and so here's a counter component, and then my app is the parent component of your application, and then we can see the counter component being used in two different ways with binding in the second example. All right. And so how does Qwik isolate components from each other? So if we look at a simple parent-child relationship, here at the top we define a child component. It's a very simple component, and then a parent component which is using that child component in the middle there. So when we wrap our components with with the Qwik, the component function. It's very simple. We just wrap it, but then allows the Qwik optimizer to kick in and parse out your components into chunks. So here it's basically it's identifying all the various parts of the code we wrote, and when onRender kicks in, it will get the div section of the parent, because that's just what the parent has. But for the child, it will just replace the child component with an empty div tag, and then it will load that child component in there when it's ready and good to go. So there's no hard dependency between those two things. All right, so all these loadings and chunks, all these lazy loading, we could be concerned about, how fast is this stuff going to be? Because when you're watching a YouTube video, you deal with buffering, and that's a linear journey. Whereas in this case, we are dealing with a non-linear journey. It's more of a choose-your-adventure book when you interact with a website, because you could be clicking on anything. And then there's also the latency of the network connection. To address this, Qwik leverages prefetching. So it uses web workers on the background thread, grabbing, fetching things that you could be clicking on. And then it also has a router called Qwik City, which does speculative fetching, and it also reduces network waterfalls. A network waterfall is grabbing your first dependency and then realizing you have dependency B, and then realizing dependency C, and that just adds all that time together. Whereas with Qwik, you can download all of those things all at once. So the component API for Qwik allows for state management, events, lifecycle hooks, context, asynchronously computed values, content projection, out of order and asynchronous rendering, and per component scoped or global styling. So it has all of those features that we expect from our rich libraries. So Qwik components are isolated, they're lazy loaded, and they're reactive. So reactivity, how does that matter? So in Angular or React, the rendering gets really complicated because we have these huge complicated trees, and change detection needs to happen, and it can be very tricky to kind of debug this situation or even fix the performance. As I mentioned before, Michael Latke gave a great talk at Angular DC about his framework RX Angular, how you can kind of tell the framework to stop worrying about it and do a lot of custom development to fix the performance issues yourself. With reactivity, Qwik can track components that are subscribed to a state, and it can only invalidate that specific component. So initial state is computed on the server, and it's serialized, so the browser doesn't need to re-render them. And if we don't need to hydrate anything, we also don't need to rebuild a reactivity graph. So we're avoiding the complexity of the other frameworks. So Qwik uses proxies for change detection, and this means if we're leveraging the use signal function for reactive state manager here, and we have a button that hides or shows the count, and then another one that increments the value. Here we have a span with the count. So if this span is hidden and we increment the count, the framework it's a no operation for the framework. It doesn't re-render anything. So it's able to very granularly keep track of what needs to be re-rendered. So, and it also keeps track of subscriptions automatically, so you don't need to unsubscribe from things and deal with memory leaks, etc. So these proxies also work on complicated objects, and child components can be invalidated in a similar fashion as well. So React always computes enables the best possible rendering performance, and your app performance doesn't suffer as the application grows in complexity. So how can you get started with Qwik? There's a Partytown, which is like a sister library to Qwik. You can use this in your frameworks today. You can get those scripts that you're loading on your index.html, push them off the web workers. It will also, as plugins for React, Angular, Vue, etc., and it will just download those, third-party dependencies on a second thread. So you can consider rebuilding your landing page with Qwik as an experimentation. So I highly encourage you doing that. And you can use Partytown to move all your loading to a web worker, leverage those integrations. And there are great articles on builder.io's blog about Qwik. And there's a playground where you can interactively play around with it. You can check out Qwik City for the router. There are some form controls out there. They're pretty nice looking. There's also Qwikifiers that has plugins for NX, Cypress, etc. So it's a pretty rich community out there. All right. So in summary, Qwik brings the developer closer to the metal, the DOM. So you're developing efficient applications from the get-go. Qwik components are resumable and independent, and Qwik surgically loads only the required bits of JavaScript, does all this asynchronously, and leverages web workers to free up the main thread. And also, most importantly, it only triggers re-renders only when there's a state change. So Qwik is a minimalist. You should become a minimalist as well. Thank you so much. You can check my book out on angularforenterprise.com and check my VS Code plugin that'll nag you about upgrading your frameworks. And follow me on Twitter at Uluca. And don't forget about the giveaway. Tweet something about the conference. Thank you.